All aboard? The Berkshire Flyer, a train that would usher people from the Berkshires to New York City, could be on the rails as soon as 2019. That's according to a report from the Berkshire Flyer Working Group. To learn more, I spoke with Eddie Sporn, a member of the working group, and State Senator Adam Hinds, who has lobbied to make this a reality for the region.
We have multiple studies to point to that talk about the economic impact. One says that over a 10-year period, we expect an increase of $600 million in new revenue into the local economy in Berkshire County. And ultimately, the study that was just completed by the Department of Transportation in the lead really talks about the second homeowners, the impact on the cultural institutions, arts and cultural and tourism, and increasingly a third element, which is folks that might live in New York City who want to work remotely and take advantage of technology that allows them to do that.
And real estate prices that are significantly less expensive than Manhattan.
That's right. Cost of living and quality of life, and a great place to raise kids. And these are all things that we hear about and why people are so excited about this.
So, Mr. Sporn, you're a member of the working group.
Yes.
Why did you decide, I know you have a planning background, but why was it important for you to get involved and take part in this effort?
Well, I just feel very strongly about transportation being one of the critical elements of the Berkshire's future. And I also am aware of the historical connection between New York City and the Berkshires. And when the Housatonic Railroad plan, which was out there for a few years, turned out to not go anywhere because of the Connecticut's funding issues, I looked for another way to sort of find a way to make a connection between New York City and the Berkshires. So I just think that it's, as Adam mentioned, it's one of the key elements for the economic future of the Berkshires to be connected to New York City and ultimately also be connected to Boston.
So when we look at this, the working group took some time to look at this issue, and now we're talking about a possible pilot in 2019, 2020. It seems like a pretty short window of time. How did it happen so quickly?
Well, it's amazing. I mean, Eddie's alluding to the point that it was his idea. He came to my office shortly after being sworn in, and it's almost unprecedented what folks are saying. Within 10 months, we've gone from legislation. So I filed an amendment to the budget last year. So we have legislative approval, the governor's approval, the Department of Transportation leading this working group. It did its work for 6 months, and now we have an outcome and a report that says we're ready to start a pilot. And we would hope to do so. They said no earlier than 2019, and I think certainly no later than 2020.
And when you say they, the working group, right?
The working group in the Department of Transportation. And so now it's my job to go into the budget and make sure that we have the money to implement the interim steps, which include things like, what are we going to do about local transportation when someone gets off the train, marketing plan, and a financial plan so that we're ready to go into this pilot.
Why do you think, by comparison, East-West Rail is consistently hitting snags and isn't really moving along very quickly? Why do you think that this has gone faster than that?
The bottom line is there was zero infrastructure investment required to have this.
We're going to use existing
We're using
tracks.
existing passenger rails, and so all it is adding to an existing service from New York City through Albany to go on to the Berkshires and Pittsfield. Interestingly, the group did look at approaches that would require more investment, including a 3,000-foot spur south of Albany to try to cut time. The working group found that it could cost $16 million or more, $17 million or more, and would only cut off about 20 minutes. So they reached this area to demonstrate how we could most effectively and most quickly get to a pilot. And the goal of the pilot is to demonstrate that there is a market, and so that we could have more consistent service between New York and the Berkshires.
When you looked at options, there were about 3 that you were seriously considering. Right. Why did you settle on this particular one where you'd use the existing track?
Again, it's a question of the biggest upfront cost is infrastructure, usually, for any sort of plan. And here we had an option, which was called Option 1A, where there was zero infrastructure costs at all because the train up from between New York City and Albany, Amtrak runs on it 13 trains a day in each direction. The trains, the line that runs between Pittsfield and Albany already has a Lakeshore Limited running on it, so it's up to standard for passenger railroad. So it's rare that you find a plan that has basically your infrastructure all set up for you. So that's why we settled on it. We understand that dollars are very tight and there are competing interests for money, and here was an opportunity to basically start a service where the amount of money we're talking about investing by comparison to other to other plans in the state of Massachusetts is very, 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 very small.
I do want to be clear, though. We absolutely are supporting and working with area senators, including Senator Lesser, to ensure that the East-West Rail gains speed and is conducted. We would benefit just as much in terms of, the whole intention of New York to the Berkshires, the Flyer, is connecting to regional economic centers, and we absolutely need the East-West Rail, and of course, even the Knowledge Corridor from New Haven, Springfield, and up to Greenfield.
Which is also moving forward. To the dollars and cents you mentioned a moment ago, $420,000 is the estimate to operate it annually. That seems low to me, just on the face of it. What's that based on?
Well, it's only over a 20-week period, so it's not an annual. It's not an annual average, an annual number. That's the number that Amtrak gave us. So they did costing for what it would cost to provide the service between New York City and between Albany and Pittsfield. Mm-hmm. I haven't seen the elements of that number. I don't know if you have, Senator.
There is a small breakdown in the report.
Okay. But basically, that's the number that Amtrak gave us for the cost of operating over a 20-week period. And that is going to be mitigated somewhat by revenues that they expect to collect from
tickets and
from
things
tickets,
like that.
Whatever. There may be opportunities, it wasn't mentioned in the report, but of be able to take people from Pittsfield to Albany and then down to New York City on the way back when the train deadheads going back between Pittsfield and Albany on Friday and going from Albany to Pittsfield on a Sunday afternoon. So there may be some additional revenue opportunities there, but that's basically the cost that Amtrak gave us for how much it would cost to operate that service.
And at this point, do we know anything about nuts and bolts, how often people could board the train, things like that, or do we still need to, we'll take a little more time before we understand that?
No, that was a clear purpose of the working group, to identify what would work. What we did, we call it the Berkshire Flyer because it's modeled on the Cape Flyer, which is ultimately a seasonal weekend service. The Cape Flyer goes from Boston to the Cape on Friday afternoon and goes back on Sunday night. And the idea is that that's when you're going to have a clear market. You can capture folks who would want to come up for the weekends. We deliberately did that in part because there is a precedent, and it's one, by the way, that is not subsidized by the state. And so we're very, very conscious of that in this case as well. So not necessarily using taxpayer money. It's one of two profitable services in the entire MBTA, which is also very well noted by the working group, and so we think it provides a basis for demonstrating there is in fact those strong links between New York City and Western Massachusetts, and one that can be capitalized on.
I know that you've lived and worked in major cities, New York and others. For you, what was the advantage or disadvantage of having public transportation such as this readily available to you?
Well, I like to think more about not just myself, but thinking about people who are a little bit younger than myself in terms of their affinity now for mass transportation. I think it's pretty well documented that millennials, people in their 30s and 40s, if given an opportunity, if given mass transportation, which is affordable, convenient, they will generally take that over cars. And so I'm the sort of person who loves trains, so it doesn't matter to me no matter what they cost. But for someone who does have rational thought and thinks about trains versus other sorts of transportation very rationally, I think there are many people in the New York metropolitan area, as well as many people in the Boston metropolitan area, if they had an opportunity to get on a train to Western Massachusetts, they would.
What's interesting is there are over 600,000 households in New York, in Manhattan alone, that do not have cars. And one thing that's very clear is they're more likely to go on weekend trips to locations where they can reach through public transit. And that was a big consideration by the working group.
Very quickly, what's next for this project?
In the interim, we'll be working on the local transportation options. For example, when folks get off in Pittsfield, are there going to be on-demand services, car rentals, shuttles to local hotels? The second component is a marketing plan. This isn't a situation where you can merely build it and they will come. We have to make sure everyone knows that it exists. And then third, a financial plan. So understanding the full financial picture of operation.